So now to our last but not least, to Rob Cowan. Rob will talk about skills, resources, and kind of planning and urban design.
Thank you, Katja. I'll be very quick because we're running a bit late. I'll see if I can do this in 5 minutes. And the first thing to say is that I'm confused because the question is where are the skills going to come from? And some of the skills are specifically to do with design coding, and some of them are urban design skills, and a lot of the skills for design coding are generic urban design skills that there's a great shortage of. So we will have to upskill to present those. Next slide, please. And I find it very confusing that the government at the same time is talking about design coding and specifying what places should look like and how they should work. And at the same time, it's talking about deregulation for planning. So how does that work? Is it serious about design coding, or are there certain places where design coding is appropriate and others not? And what does design coding mean anyway? Next slide, please. Because actually, there isn't a specific definition of what a design code is. The term is used to cover a whole range of different things, and design codes and design guides, in some way the terms are interchangeable, and there's no problem with that, because generally in urban design it doesn't work trying to define things like master plan. We know that the term isn't very specific. All sorts of things are called master plans, and that doesn't matter as long as we talk about what we're actually doing at a particular time. And I find it useful to think about design codes, that they're trying to do two things. Or if we're describing, first of all, we need to say, well, what are we doing? And two things we can define is, well, how prescriptive is this thing going to be? And if it's highly prescriptive, then maybe we call it a design code. If it's advisory, maybe it's a design guide. Again, what scale is it being related to? The scale of a plot. A lot of design codes relate to fairly small scales, or defining things on plots. Other design codes relate to areas, and the government is talking about design codes as relating to the whole towns, the whole local authority areas. And all these things are possible, but we need to know what we're doing. And the other dimension not shown on this graph is really the amount of local distinctiveness. So, for example, you can say all streets should have trees, and that can be a national policy. You could say that's a design code policy. It's not local distinctive, it's a national standard. And you can have national standard design codes, or we can have design codes or design guides that are locally distinctive. So we need to think about the scale, the prescriptiveness, and the degree of local distinction. And if we sort all those things out, then we'll know what it is we're talking about. But we shouldn't assume that because we're saying we're going to do a design code, that tells us what it's going to be. Next slide, please. So we need skills, and some of these skills we have, and some we'll need more of if we're going to do a lot of more coding. And some of these things are generic urban design skills. And I use this diagram in thinking about what skills you might need for producing a design code, and also for planning the process of design coding. And that is, we need, if we're going to produce a design code, we don't just decide we're going to have a code. What we need to do is design the process and how it's going to work. So we decide the code, and then we design the code. And designing a code is a particular complex skill. The praising the local context, an enormous part of urban design, but that's incredibly important, and it can be difficult to do. It can take a lot of resources. Applying policy and guidance, taking account of other regulatory regimes. We think about designing a code that is going to be shaping development, but of course there's a million things that shape development. A lot of them are actually codes or regulations or ways of working or professional practices. And unless we understand what these things are and how they affect what we're going to design, we won't be able to design a design code that does a few things effectively. And then we need to test the code once we've produced it. Does it work? Will it prevent bad design? Will it enable good design? Then we need to adopt it. We need to use it. How do you use a design code? What does it mean to use a design code? Well, we need to understand that. And then in using it, do we do design review of development proposals in the light of the code? And how does that work? And do the people who are doing the design code understand how that works? And then things change. We need to monitor and enforce the code. Is it enforceable? How do you enforce a design code? What does that mean? And we need to review it and revise it if it's going to continue in use, if the development is continuing. And the other things on the right, still relating to designing the code, applying the necessary skills and resources. Do we have those? Where are they going to come from? Engaging with stakeholders and the public. Generally, producing a design code isn't just somebody sitting down and writing a code or adopting a standard code, but working with stakeholders and saying, what's important about this place? What do we really want to put down on paper and agree that's going to shape this development? Well, again, there's a completely different set of skills to run that sort of process. We've heard several people already talking about understanding what will be viable. The code needs to be based on economics and understanding development economics, and deciding what elements will be mandatory or discretionary, and they all go into the code. So there's the challenge. That's the process that we now need to try and make work, and I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob.